Rainworld's second DLC, The Watcher, came out last week. And to cut to the chase, I do not like it. At all. I enjoyed playing the base game enough to play it blindfolded and do all the downpour campaigns on a dance pad, but I was done with this DLC after one playthrough. And the Steam reviews are significantly worse than the base game and the previous DLC, so evidently I'm not the only person who feels this way. So let's talk about what's wrong with The Watcher. There will be spoilers in this review, but focused around gameplay, not the story. The clearest comparison for The Watcher is Rainworld's first DLC, Downpour. They both cost $15. Downpour is an absolutely phenomenal DLC, so this comparison is going to be heavily skewed in its favor. In terms of content, Downpour gave the player 5, technically 6, mechanically unique Slugcats with their own campaigns, along with the ability to do co-op, arena challenges, and the expedition game mode. Those Slugcats mostly used the same world as the base game, with 1 or 2 unique areas per campaign. It spread itself wide, with the Slugcat abilities and lore defining the campaign more than the new areas. The Watcher has only 1 Slugcat, The Watcher. However, the campaign takes place almost entirely in a new world, and quite a massive one at that. In terms of size, it is the single largest campaign in the game, with a huge variety of areas and lots of new creatures. And that's all that it adds. There's no additional content or support in the game modes that Downpour added. So, the one thing that The Watcher has going for it is that it is a very large and completely new campaign. Vanilla Rainworld has 12 regions, Downpour added 10, but they aren't all there for every Slugcat. The Watcher has 23 completely new areas, plus infected areas based on the base game. That is massive. It more than doubled the number of areas in the game. The campaign is dense with new content. It's an entirely new world, and one that feels much bigger than the one you know. And most of the new areas are visually beautiful. But there's a hollowness to that beauty. Despite how objectively large the world is, it feels empty. Rainworld is a game that's known for its environmental storytelling and ecosystem simulation, and both of those feel absent from this DLC. In Rainworld, you enter and exit areas through karma gates. Those areas will be quite large and contain creatures and objects that are appropriate for it. As you make your way through the world, you'll see new species of lizards and creatures that have adapted to different environments, and it'll gradually change as you get to new areas. In the Watcher DLC, you enter and exit areas through portals. There's no world, just a bunch of disconnected levels that you hop between erratically. Because of that, the player gets pretty severe whiplash and tonal inconsistencies. You can bounce from the heat ducts of active machinery to a locust-filled desert to a frozen surface. Instead of exploring a world, you're exploring an art gallery of cool-looking areas. There's no cohesion. It'd be like wandering into the painted world at the bottom of Blighttown. Doing it like this is a complete disregard for the world building that Rainworld is so heavily built upon, and in my opinion, is a core part of the game's identity. And I don't understand why the developers made that decision. These areas could have been pieced together into a world using karma gates or some other physical connection. Stormy Coast and Coral Caves already had existing karma gates to each other from back when they were mods, and like 5 areas in the campaign are just subregions of those areas. Yes, it would have caused the campaign to play out slightly differently, and some of the areas would need to be tweaked, but it would have made the campaign actually have a world, and the player could still gain the ability to make portals. You could have the set world, and then the player can rip apart reality to hop about, and that still lets the second ending play out in the same way. Instead of a complex, interconnected environment that tells the story of the world, we got what feels like playing with randomizer mods. I can't overstate how much I dislike that. The connected, intentional nature of everything, the world building that was added to with every screen you discovered, all of that is gone. You can't make a world map like this in the DLC. This is the nightmare of a world map that the DLC gives you, and none of the rooms that connect to the other regions are marked on it either. Connections aside, the substance of these levels and their designs are not great either. I genuinely can't tell what's happening in many of these rooms without looking at the map. The visual clarity is atrocious. There are death pits everywhere, the rooms are cluttered with obscuring effects, foreground objects that don't have collision, and overall are just confusing. That was something that happened in the base game. I know several people that struggled to figure out which poles are real in the leg, but it's dialed up to 11 here. There's a room with a portal in Aether Ridge. Portals cause massive visual distortions and make seeing things pretty difficult. There's also a pole plant in that room. Hell, a mechanic of the DLC is permanently leaving giant visual distortions in the map late in the game. The wind mechanic isn't well balanced either. I saw a friend get trapped in a room, grabbed by 3 moths as they tried to pull him out, but because of the wind, they kept getting pushed back. More and more moths flew in and couldn't fly out because the wind was too strong, and he was stuck there for minutes, unable to do anything because the wind made the moths unable to leave. Let's look at the tail of the orange lizard. The orange lizard is a social lizard that can be found near communication machinery, drawing a connection between the two. In the spots where iterators or ancients would send messages to each other, there are lizards that are able to communicate with each other. This is true for every campaign, until you get to Saint, where orange lizards are just thrown everywhere. Why? Because they're social lizards and can keep each other warm, letting them outcompete the others. So why is there just a pack of orange lizards immediately upon walking into Corval Cave? And then you've got the dens themselves, which fall into one of 2 categories: way too numerous or way too sparse. There's a salamander den in Turbulent Pump that's directly left of the shelter and spawns a salamander that just sits there and does nothing. And you have to walk past it every single cycle. And also in Turbulent Pump, 10 million Corval crabs, probably the worst enemy in the game. They're Hitler's response to snails. They spawn in huge numbers, clog up the only paths forward, and have almost no counterplay. If you're lucky, they'll position themselves in a way that you can hit them with a rock, and there won't be too many there. If not, you're just screwed. In general, I'm not fond of a lot of the newly added creatures. Once again, the DLC neglects the ecosystem aspect of Rainworld. Much like how the areas don't fit into a greater world, these enemies don't fit into a greater ecosystem. In the Badlands area, there's this swarm of locusts that swarms you if you're out in the open, kind of like how leeches will try to drown you in the water. Now, how does the environment react to having such a deadly, omnipresent threat? It doesn't. The locusts only target the player. They ignore every other creature. Leeches will try to drown lizards and scavengers, squidcators will try to hunt them, but these locusts only care about slugcats. Those Corval crabs, the barnacles, they are just a physical manifestation of the developer's spite. Lizards won't even react to them, they just repeatedly walk into the crab and get stunned. You can't eat them, you can't spear them, they don't try to eat anything else, they're just hatred. The frogs, as far as I can tell, only target the player and are a much more annoying version of jungle leeches. They steal your food, stun you, and I haven't found a way to knock them off. I also haven't seen them target anything else. The sky whales, while visually beautiful, don't really feel like living creatures. They're more like sky taxis that shuttle you back and forth. The clearest comparison is reindeer. Reindeer were tall enough to walk over the wormgrass, which was a core part of the Farmeray's ecosystem. They have a hierarchy system of bowing, and you could feed them and bait them with spore puffs. Environmental storytelling tells you that scavengers hunt them and adorn their skulls with pearls. They feel like a living part of the world. The sky whales seem to just fly left and right. Now, not every new enemy is like this. The moths do try and succeed at eating other creatures. They actually seem frightfully effective at it. I've never seen them lose a fight, even against red lizards. The new lizards do take part in their ecosystems. The skinks will coat you with their tongue juice to allow you to ignore locusts, for instance. But one of the other new lizards constantly generates a windy shield around it, which pushes away creatures and projectiles and consumes that shield to fire a freezing laser beam that instantly kills the player. This is a real enemy in a serious campaign. The other new lizard slows time in an AoE around it and permanently causes random stuns until you rest if you spend too long near it. I had heard somebody say that it was like the DLC powered up lizards, like how the DLCs powered up slugcats, and I think they might have been onto something. The base game lizards climb walls, have a tongue, swim, can camouflage, stuff that's overall pretty grounded and reasonable. Downpour added a lizard that can jump and spit, a lizard that can grapple, and one that can swim better, still very grounded. The Watcher added a lizard that can burrow in sand, very reasonable, and a lizard with a self-contained blizzard generator and laser beam, and a lizard who slows time. There's a pretty big jump from "this lizard can jump" to "this lizard fires laser beams." The slow time lizard does have the slow time mushrooms growing on it, so presumably it's emitting some hallucinogenic chemical around it. The effect is justified in that sense. But it is not a fun mechanic, and it's incredibly jarring to play against, and it permanently debuffs you for the entire cycle in an area that has extended swimming sections where you will just die if you get the stun effect. The blizzard lizard seems to just exist. I don't understand why it generates blizzards or fires laser beams. It doesn't really look very modified or mechanical, and it sure as hell isn't fun getting blasted by lasers from off-screen. And then we have the player himself, who has the ability to turn invisible. You're the watcher, you watch things, but the problem is, it's not really fun to do that. You just kind of ignore everything, or the enemy is specifically designed to counter invisibility and it does nothing. On my first playthrough, I actively avoided using it because, well, it wasn't fun. It manages to do what Downpour did and make the Slugcat feel exceptionally powerful and outside the ecosystem, but unlike Downpour, it isn't fun. Another example of very annoying design. Corrupted popcorn plants. These function exactly like normal popcorn plants, except they give only a quarter pip of food and have like a 50% chance to stun you when you eat them. These are a giant middle finger to the player. Hunter and Artificer, despite being carnivorous and barely getting any food from fruits, still get a full food pip from popcorn plants. That's because it would just be very tedious for the player otherwise. It's an unlimited food source, like you're gonna stay there and eat it, making it take 4 times as long will just cause tedium. But in this DLC, not only do these take 4 times as long to eat, there's a good chance you're going to get stunned every single bite, and you might say, oh, well, just don't eat it, it's corrupted. It's a bit hard to do that when areas start getting significantly corrupted and there aren't that many available food sources. Like, it's unlimited food. I'm gonna eat it if it's there. Making it take 10 times as long isn't gonna stop me, it's just gonna annoy me. A lot. If you don't want the player to eat it, take it away. Don't do this. Between the non-existent world design, lack of visual clarity, and messy enemies, I don't think the Watcher's areas are very good. Again, this isn't talking about literally every area and enemy. These problems aren't going to be present everywhere, but they are present more frequently than I would like, and it made exploring the new areas feel a lot like a chore instead of fun. An overwhelming amount of new content that does not connect in any coherent way is thrown at the player with no guidance, and the areas are rife with design issues. And that's not even touching on how absurdly large Outer Rim is, or how many times the game makes you climb up the throne. From my understanding, the DLC was rushed and not playtested very well, which does explain a lot of this. If you're adding a massive amount of new content and don't have the time to playtest and refine it, it will feel messy. Let's talk about lore, and if you're worried about spoilers, there won't be any, because there's not much lore in the DLC. The primary source of lore in Rain World is the environmental storytelling and the data pearls. The environmental storytelling is very loose. There are some reveals and connections to be drawn, but it's sparse. Most of the areas have zero lore to them as far as I can tell, and there are no data pearls, which are the main source of what we know about a lot of Rain World's lore. You do have Miku, the Echo you meet in the campaign, who tells you basically nothing of substance. Half of her dialogue lines were bugged, so maybe there was lore in those lines, I don't know. All of the available lore is incredibly cryptic. Downpour had a problem of telling you instead of showing you its lore. The Watcher does a 180 and tells you nothing, and everything it shows you is pretty damn confusing. As far as I can tell, the DLC takes place in a third canon. Vanilla Rain World exists in its own canon, Downpour is in an alternate universe, and I would have been much more lenient on the DLC story in my retrospective video had I known that at the time. The Watcher's canon isn't confirmed as far as I know, but it's pretty clearly not in Downpour's universe, nor do I think it's in the vanilla one for various reasons. The campaign opens with the Slugcat spawning in an incredibly interesting diseased version of the world. Everything is weird and wrong, and it's genuinely quite compelling. But you're railroaded into a small version of the world because most of the areas are blocked off, and once you meet Miku for the third time, you get thrown somewhere completely different, never to return. It's a glorified bait and switch. You start the campaign with this incredibly interesting story, then get it pulled out from under you and you never get to explore and learn more. And that's quite possibly the worst way to start the DLC. It's pretty much guaranteed to disappoint the player. You're shown something that grabs your attention, you want to explore it, you want to get into things, you're interested, you spend an hour or two there, but everything is blocked off and that's kind of frustrating. And then you get put somewhere completely new, and do you know what the player's response is? It's not, wow, a cool new area to explore. It's, okay, when can I go back to where I was and keep playing through that story? Because that's what I actually want to do, and this isn't very interesting. And the answer is never, because that never was the story. It was just there to catch your attention. Instead of starting with a blank slate, you have expectations of a much more interesting story built up and then taken away. The story you do get is disjointed, confusing, and doesn't seem to know what it wants to be. The ending felt like it just threw in something cute and something that was going to excite people interested in the existing lore, neither of which were properly built up to or deserved. You're left asking questions, but not good questions. They're questions like, that was the ending? And what does this have to do with anything else that was going on? I mentioned that the DLC drops you into a brand new world without guidance and expects you to just figure it out. Well, hold on, isn't that what vanilla Rainworld does? It isn't, actually. Survivor and Monk have an overseer that highlights dangers and food, points to nearby shelters, and overall tries to push you towards where you need to go. Eventually, you find 5 Pebbles, who just tells you where to go. Hunter doesn't have an overseer, but he does have a neuron fly and a data pearl, both of which are important to iterators and indicate where you should be headed. In Downpour, you get told what to do from the iterators, or in Saint's case, you have a large flash of light whenever you're in an area with an echo to indicate that you should go there. The Watcher has nothing. You are completely in the dark. Even once you meet Miku, you have no idea how many times you need to meet her, or if you really need to meet her at all. The opening cutscene seemingly has nothing to do with the rest of the campaign. I know why the other Slugcats are doing what they're doing. Survivor is looking for his family. Monk is looking for Survivor. Hunter was sent to revive Moon. Artificer wants revenge. Messenger. Gourmand is seeing if there's food for the Slugcat colony. The Watcher is just there. You could remove that entire opening cutscene and it would not change my perception of anything. The whole campaign, I just felt lost and confused, and not the good, man, I can't wait to see what they throw at me next kind of confusion. So, what does the Watcher have to do? Because if it's simple, then the lack of guidance isn't really that important. The Watcher needs to explore a giant, completely new world and find Hatsune Miku 9 times. The entire campaign is a scavenger hunt without any hints. Most of the areas have echoes, but not all of them. You're just meandering around, hoping to stumble into her, and there is a second ending, which manages to be even more frustrating than that, and is what made me stop playing the DLC entirely. And another thing, in most of the Rainworld campaigns, if you find yourself in an area that you don't want to be in, you can use a passage to quickly travel to somewhere else. The only 2 campaigns where you can't use passages are Hunter and Saint, both of which are intended to be played after the player knows the world well and are very difficult campaigns. The Watcher, despite having a gigantic new world that the player knows nothing about, cannot use passages. That adds even more tedium. Let's say you need to get back to an area. You can flounder around trying to walk there, spend several minutes trying to make sense of the confusing world map, try to locate the rooms where the portals are in, which, by the way, are not marked on the map in any way, and hope that you can avoid the dangers and remember things well enough to get back. Alternatively, you can try making your own teleport portals, which is just rolling dice and hoping it gets you to a nearby region. It would be pretty nice if you could do what almost every other Slugcat can do and just passage back. I had about 200 hours in Rainworld before Downpour. After Downpour, I had around 700. I was forcing myself to play this DLC by the 15-hour mark, and by the 30-hour mark, I was fed up and just stopped. It doesn't help that the DLC adds exactly 0 content outside of the campaign itself. There's no arena mode support, no unlocks to be found in the world, no data pearls to be read, the music isn't in the jukebox, the Watcher has no challenges, can't be played in Expedition or Safari mode, there's no jolly co-op support, there are no new passages to get, hell, there aren't even achievements for the DLC. The developers have put out their future plans for the Watcher, bug fixes and patches, then adding in new content, secrets, a final ending, and things like that. And maybe those updates will alleviate some of the issues I have with it. I hope that at the very least they'll add in some of the content that the DLC should have launched with. I know that long-term attention like that can fix a lot. Look at Seekers of the Storm for Risk of Rain 2, which has been getting significant changes and improvements with its long-term roadmap. But right now, I don't feel excited by the prospect of updates and more content to the Watcher. I already played through what felt like all the content it has to offer and found the experience frustrating and underwhelming. Fixing it up later won't change that experience. Rainworld isn't a game that you can just play again, and the fact is that this is the version of the Watcher that I did play. I can't unlearn the maps, the echolocations, the endings. If the campaign gets a lot of balance changes and patches, that's great, but that won't be a playthrough that I can have. This isn't a video that I feel great about making because I do love Rainworld deeply, and I spent days contemplating whether I wanted to make this video or a guide going over all the different things in the Watcher, the echoes, the enemies, the areas, whatever. Before it came out, I wanted to do nothing but play this DLC for weeks. But after finishing it, and after I spent hours trying to figure out if I was soft-locked teleporting back and forth between 4 areas with both of my throne portals going there, I had made up my mind. I wasn't soft-locked, but I was done with the DLC. To me, the Watcher is a gigantic, hollow spectacle. The regions are massive and visually stunning, but it feels cold. It doesn't feel anything like Downpour, nor does it feel like vanilla. I did make a retrospective video where I criticized some of Downpour's flaws, but I do love that DLC and think that Downpour is fantastic. And even with Downpour's flaws, I could feel the love and passion of the developers bursting through every seam. They crammed in as much as they could, and the whole DLC was a love letter to the game and to the community. I don't feel that same passion and love coming from this DLC, and maybe that's just due to time constraints and the inability to spend as much time as they would have liked perfecting it. I don't doubt that the developers want the DLC to be fantastic, but it feels like I bought an unfinished and unplaytested DLC that does not meet the quality standard that I came to expect after Vanilla and Downpour. It feels like if somebody remembered that Vanilla Rainworld was frustrating, difficult, and confusing and wanted to recreate that experience, but forgot to add in all of the things that made me invested in the world and willing to overcome that difficulty. I was constantly asking myself if I was enjoying it, and the answer was usually mixed, but I kept going under the hope that it would improve. It never did, and I struggle to find good things to say about the DLC. At best, it felt mediocre, and my enjoyment of it was coasting off of my enjoyment of Rainworld as a whole and the novelty of seeing new things. But that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? I had asked around and tried to get other people's thoughts on the DLC, and I did find a lot of mixed opinions. I do feel kind of bad expressing my opinions on the DLC, and it honestly feels like I'm letting people down by not liking it. I do want to like it, but the fact is, I don't. And maybe I'm just not having a great week, or my expectations were in the wrong place or whatever, but it's pretty much killed any desire I have to play Rainworld right now. And I don't foresee that changing unless some updates drastically alter the DLC. At this point, all that's left is to wait and see what gets added.